Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jack Nyman, and I'm the director of the Stephen L. Newman Real Estate Institute at Baruch College, City University of New York. Thank you. One of your hosts for today's event. We have an ambitious agenda and a truly remarkable set of speakers and moderators. They bring us insights informed by experience within our region, our capital, and with airports around the world. The Institute has a broad agenda because real estate interests generate and converge with a multitude of public policy issues. Airports are a dramatic case in point. Our region has the largest airport system in the nation. Its smooth functioning and the regional interconnectivity that facilitates the flow of people and goods are vital to our economy. This links airports directly to real estate market values, and the performance of our airports directly affects our economy's global competitiveness, including our ability to attract foreign investment, which in turn affects our real estate market. What's more, airports aren't simply functional. They're driving forces for development. On a website named Aerotropolis, John Casarda predicts that airports will shape business location and urban development in the 21st century as much as seaports did in the 18th century, railroads in the 19th, and highways in the 20th. For most of the public, the significant policy issues related to airports have tended to remain under the radar. However, this may be changing. Notably, yesterday's New York Times reported on a new federal Future of Aviation Advisory Committee. The committee's composition cuts across the industry, exactly the kind of collaborative, multi-stakeholder approach that today's conference reflects. And what will this committee find when it examines our region's airports? JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark are operating at or near capacity with aging infrastructure and, in many cases, outmoded technologies. Physically, they can't expand beyond their perimeters. Projected population growth will probably worsen congestion, not just at airports, but for the ground transportation systems that serve them. This makes for a tough set of challenges. How to accommodate rapid growth in air traffic within rigid space constraints, how to upgrade aging 20th century infrastructure and outmoded technologies while maintaining safe, secure, and efficient operations, and how to accomplish all of this sustainably in a period of fiscal austerity. Happily, long before the formation of the new advisory committee, a lot of very, very smart people started working hard to meet these challenges. We'll be hearing from some of them today. Their presentations, I hope, will convince you that our airports are at a dramatic and historic turning point.
So today I really want to talk about 3 or 4 key concepts, none of which should be controversial, I hope, Marcia. But I think they're fundamental to shaping this conference. Sue Baer, who's obviously our aviation director, and I were over in Europe, and I attended a EU Transport Committee meeting in Leipzig. And it was fascinating to see Leipzig, the 19th century center of music in 1880s. It built this massive train station to be the center of European commerce. Quickly, history through World War I, World War II, and then the rise of the Berlin Wall and the communist state froze Leipzig in its position, and today leaves it with this monumentally beautiful train station with all of the connectivity and size and capacity, and absolutely no connection to the world. And it sits there as this sort of symbol of what happens when planning and connectivity don't, in fact, bring the economic prosperity and are not part of an integrated world. And the EU Transport Committee was really struggling with that as well. But what struck me time and time again, whatever language it was, and I sat next to the, this guy was right out of Central Casting. I sat next to the Soviet, now the Russian EU Transport Commissioner, and he didn't speak good English, but literally every single thing he said is what I would have said as head of the Port Authority. There was not a single problem that he was facing that we are not facing here. And what are those problems? The problem fundamentally starts with resources. That until we have the financial capacity to build the infrastructure that we know we have, we can sit at McGraw-Hill and hear the wonderful thoughts and ideas, but until there is the physical funding for infrastructure to create an aviation system which without a doubt follows that march of history, which takes us to that point in time that aviation will in fact drive the commerce of the 21st century, the way ports, highways, and maritime facilities and rail drove it historically in the United States. Until we find the financial capacity to build those projects, all of the best planning in the world will not achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves. Second, and this is where I think these conferences are vital, is that even with all those resources, business as usual and how we think about doing projects is simply no longer sustainable. I think the notion of the federal government having a role, state, city governments, and organizations like the Port Authority, which are largely historically been bureaucracies that had their own self-referential set of priorities, their own self-referential set of funding mechanisms, and even their policy analytics of why they would end up doing something is now no longer the underpinning of a financial model that gets us to innovation. And then third, I think what is really clear is that the practical on-the-ground reality of building things, of literally just building things, has now taken on a sense of urgency, both in terms of timing that it takes to build, the regulatory requirements associated with building, the funding frameworks that have been created, that simple reality has reached a point now where, whether it's at the federal level, whether it's the state level, at the city level, the time that we talk about a project and the time that we actually deliver the project simply misses the historic or even temporal opportunity that that project probably has created. And that also fundamentally has to change. So when I think about this conference today, I will end with a charge on funding, as I think I've spoken many times about before, that we do not fund infrastructure in this country. We talk about it, we use it, we prosper from it, but we don't actually think about what it does for us, and we don't then have a political framework to end up funding it. Second, I want to talk about how innovation and almost cultural communication amongst the various players within the aviation industry and all modes of transport has now really got to be different, and I think there's some good models there. And then I want to just talk about some practical ideas that the Port Authority is facing. But let's just take one project, which is the Bay Runway project. And for anybody who's flown out of Kennedy, every airline pilot will tell you that the reason why we're delayed is because the Port Authority is building a new runway. You probably take out of Chicago and the airline pilots. We're delayed at the airport today at O'Hare because New York City and the Port Authority is building a new runway. It's the universal excuse for why there are delays within our airport system. But it is truly a mischaracterization of what that project is. And I think if you just look at that as a symbol of how aviation projects have to now be developed, you have the beginning, the kernel of an idea, the kernel of a strategy that might get us to a larger infrastructure agenda for airports. Just the size and complexity of this project is daunting. We literally, the aviation department, have been working with the FAA and our airline partners for 4 years to get ready for the complete milling of the Bay Runway, the largest runway at Kennedy Airport, working with the airlines to look at schedules, to tweak schedules, to talk about literally replacing an entire runway. You know, you can look at the numbers and they're all there, but it's like every football field in America could get dug up and replanted. We could pave from here to San Francisco. But fundamentally what that project was about building new infrastructure while an airport was operating. And what did that require? It required funding, one. It required a level of partnership between the airport and the airport users and the Port Authority. And it required a level of management to deliver it that was really unforeseen when the project was first envisioned. So at the end of June 30th, we will have successfully completed the Bay Runway project. And what will that mean? It will mean that literally if we can get one additional plane off, one slot in an hour, We're generating $90 million a year in economic activity. We're saving $500 million worth of airline cost as a result of now having a concrete versus an asphalt runway. We have built a wider and more accommodating capacity for large aircraft. This project would have been unheard of probably 10 years ago because it was that multidisciplinary project that brought the FAA, the airline partners, and the Port Authority together to build. But I would also posit that for as much as the Port Authority is criticized, there is not another single agency within this region or even this country that would have been able to manage a project of that complexity and that amount of importance to this region. So think about what that project was. It was literally performing open heart surgery at the airport while Kennedy continues to be obviously the busiest international airport. But it starts with funding. Without money, without that financial capacity to build that project, all of the innovation would have never happened. So let's recognize that money drives. People ask me when I was at the Port Authority, what's the most important thing you can do about problems? If you don't throw money at problems, I don't know what you do throw at problems, because you can talk about them for as long as you want, but until you have the financial capacity to build them, you're not going to solve the problem. So let's talk about that today a lot. Let's talk about how we're going to extract wealth, value out of a transportation system to reinvest in it. But look what also happened in that project. And this kind of amazes me because it's sort of like the history of ideas. When does something which is there but nobody understands it suddenly become there and everybody understands it, and it's like, hey, of course there's gravity. The apple didn't have to fall from the tree and hit Isaac Newton. It would have always been there. But why did it take that one moment for suddenly just everybody to realize that gravity does exist? What happened when we were planning for the Bay Runway? We met with the FAA. We talked to the airlines, and it turns out something fairly simple that we had been doing before, which was a metering program with software technology during major snowstorms, in fact, was a very innovative idea to begin to bring far more clarity and regulation and efficiency to gate utilization and queuing for takeoff, so that the famous conga line that Kennedy ends up getting criticized for, that we lived with for so long as an inevitable reality about how an airport has to function, lo and behold, out of the Bay Runway project comes the idea of, if we've done this within snow emergencies, why can't we do this same thing continually? And let's work with the airlines, and again, let's work with the FAA to see if that software, which is there at Kennedy today, allows us to now actually track where the plane is, at which gate, what is the slot that it needs to get on the runway to take off efficiently. How do we take that simple technology, which was there for a snow emergency, and replicate it for an entire airport? And lo and behold, that's what the Port Authority, our staff, and the FAA have been able to do. And now you no longer have the sort of randomness of 30 or 40 planes pulling away from the gate, and then everybody racing to be that one, head of the queue line, when everybody's sitting there and craning out the window to wonder, are we 10th in line, are we 30th in line, or are we 50th in line? So out of the Bay Runway project, there's a eureka moment where here is an innovation which is there before us. It is there before us. Continental Airlines, I give really credit for it at Newark Airport, who is obviously a major carrier there, has recognized this innovation as well. But we have the same issues of how do we replicate that at LaGuardia? How do we take a simple form of software-based technology, information sharing amongst airlines who are, and this is, Marcia, well, I will start to get controversial. The airline industry, which has generally not cooperated across carriers, saw each competitive position at risk with cooperation, have begun to recognize that that's not the case. That is, as you get more efficiency and more flights can take off, all airlines end up prospering. So we started with funding, and then we found that how do you end up innovating out of that funding world, created now a new opportunity to begin to address technology and aviation, and that's just the start. But it can't be the end. I mean, that is the reality. It simply can't be the end. That you will never unleash the economic capacity of an airport if we're still doing software packages out of management offices routing hundreds and hundreds of planes in a single day. And that's why I think, without a doubt, the NextGen project is probably the most important innovation that this nation can undertake for the airline industry. That we can talk about customer service-driven terminals. We can talk about how well we are handling baggage. We can talk about how well we're handling cargo. We can talk about all of the niches that make up the aviation industry. But until we have fundamentally figured out how to manage that airspace, that highway system, that port system, in a far better and more innovative way and in an efficient way, we will trap all of that good investment on the ground and leave it there fundamentally untapped. So NextGen, a project that is so simple, it would seem, replacing a World War II radar system with what every single soccer mom, father, driver, whatever, GPS in your car that you take for granted, we have yet to really introduce in terms of how we manage our airspace. And that is truly an exceptionally costly venture, but it is a venture which we know the technology, we know where we have to put it, and we then have to recognize that it needs to be funded. And so if you don't know what NextGen is, you never met Bill Dakota, first of all, but you also never really understood of how you start a project. Take the Eisenhower interstate system. It didn't get all built at once. I mean, come on. I lived in Massachusetts. I think Route 91 took up my entire childhood. That every single time my parents said, we're driving down to New York City, it was like, oh my God, we're going to be on Route 91 for 7 hours. Because that was one of the last parts of the interstate highway system that got built. The point is it gets started, and when it gets started, it starts to then multiply the benefits. So where should NextGen get started? It needs to get started here. I mean, come on. This is, as we heard and I joked, every airline pilot will tell you that the problems with air congestion start and begin in the New York region. That's fundamentally the bottleneck throughout the entire system. So as Dakota used to say, let's bring NextGen to Broadway. This is where it needs to open, and this is where it needs to start to be funded. And again, the airlines need to begin to see that project, perhaps funded federally, and perhaps coming from a federal program built with the aviation industry, is their key to the future as much as it is the key to the Kennedy Airport, Newark Airport, and this whole region's future. We can no longer tolerate the kind of delays that a 1945 radar system ends up creating for us. You know it, I know it. It's not a matter of analysis, it's not a matter of technology, it's fundamentally a matter of how do you have the political capacity to advance what economists will tell you is the key driver for international competitiveness. But one of the things I do want to say about that is in terms of international competitiveness, we have to be very careful how we talk about competition, because people don't fly into Kennedy Airport because it's a beautiful airport instead of flying into Singapore. They don't fly into Chicago because they'd rather go to the United Terminal. We are competitive not for the reasons that there are people who are going somewhere else. We're competitive for connectivity. We are competitive for how we perform within an international world which is now growing exponentially. And our capacity to fit into that world is where we have to be competitive. We have to be a connection to London. We don't compete with Heathrow. We have to be as equally competitive in terms of how efficient we are as a driver of economic activity as Heathrow is, as Singapore is, as Hong Kong. It's not competition in those sort of aspects. It's the kind of competitions where people will be making regional investment decisions based on how well this region functions as a high efficiency economic driver. And that's true for the Port Authority bus terminal, it's true for our maritime facilities, and it's true for something as simple as the path system, that transportation efficiency is what we have to be competitive at, and that is the role that we're playing in the international economy. And that's why NextGen has to be the federal platform for growth in the aviation industry. And I really must applaud the congressional delegation from New York and New Jersey who have been a leader in talking about just this sort of initiative. But they are just a small group and a much larger group that hasn't been able to recognize what that challenge really is and has not had the capacity to step up and fund NextGen. And believe me, I am completely sympathetic to the Obama administration in terms of the fiscal exhaustion that they must be facing in Washington. You know, you come in and you have to fight two wars. You have to bail out the banking industry. You have to bail out the auto industry. You have to completely revamp banking regulations. You have to fund a stimulus package. You have to face the tragedy, the complexity of the ecological disaster in the Gulf. I mean, I just really can't imagine the level of sort of political exhaustion that must be consuming Washington. And again, I give the congressional delegation a tremendous amount of credit to provide leadership. But that's what we need, we really need to work on, because we cannot afford to be exhausted of all of the problems that this administration or previous administrations have faced. And that's why the last thing that I want to talk about is perhaps the most important, because it's about the money and show me the money. And we have for too long allowed the federal funding mechanisms, such as the passenger facility charge, to remain outdated. It is at $4.50. It must go to $7. You look at what we need to do at Kennedy Airport. You look at the Port Authority's financial capacity. There are more than enough projects under a $7 PFC program for the Port Authority to completely fill that basket. And we are leaving innovations, construction, all sorts of applications on the table, on the planning, because there's not that federal funding. And the airlines will say, and I won't name any of you, but you'll all say, sorry, well, no, this is the most heavily taxed industry in the world. We can't afford to put those sort of, you know, user charges on our passengers. All of that may be true. You may be the most heavily taxed business. You also are, interestingly enough, the #1 driver for economic activity than any other industry that we've seen when we've done our economic studies. More direct, indirect economic activity comes out of the aviation industry than any other industry within the metropolitan region. So you ask yourself, if you are that driver, and you've seen price elasticity for ticket prices on a single plane range hundreds of dollars on a single ticket, you know, on a seat differential, the elasticity of what people are willing to pay for. You look at the introduction of fees associated with bags. Checking a bag can cost you $50. Buying a pillow can cost you $7. There is a elastic demand that should allow us to assess a reasonable increase into the passenger facility charge that people would be willing to pay, that would get reinvested in the very product that they most want to use. That's the irony of this, that this is the very product that they most want to use, that they complain about the most when they use it, because the solutions to make that experience better remain unfunded. So with men like Congressman Meeks, the congressional delegation, the Port Authority will be pushing hard for an increase in the passenger facility charge. Funding remains the key for innovation, and we must have a change in the passenger facility charge. So again, it's simple. We know what we need to do. We know we need money. We know we need innovation and cross-fertilization of ideas, and we need practical solutions to problems that we've already identified.
NextGen is really about the next generation of American scientists, the next generation of American engineers and designers and builders and managers and pilots and ground crews and air traffic controllers, passengers, large, medium, and small-sized businesses. Like the space program, NextGen, in my opinion, may lead to innovation that we can't even imagine now. And I'm sure that the individuals that did the highway transportation system did not imagine it would be as vast as it is today. NextGen is multidimensional, and that it has the potential of resolving the interconnected problems of airline safety, rapidly increasing use of air transportation, the fact that global commerce is chiefly air transport commerce, and the need to successfully combine safety with speed, and the challenge of creating jobs and opportunity across all sectors of the regional, state, national, and global economics. NextGen is about the future. Among other things, it is the vehicle for creating jobs for the future, with jobs that are new to the future, maintaining America's global competitiveness as well as its global leadership. And NextGen comes at a unique moment in history, a unique moment in time. We have a systemic air transport crisis that must be resolved. We are in the midst of a fierce struggle to recover from the Great Recession. We have enormous scientific and technological capability that can be applied to the air transport crises. And in my opinion, we have a president who understands the future and knows that we've got to have that forward thinking. In fact, I know that President Obama has helped set in motion the dynamics for NextGen's long-term funding that included $1.1 billion for NextGen air traffic control technologies in the budget request from the Department of Transportation. That's an increase of $275 million, or 32%, over the last fiscal year. Whether we get that through Congress or not is a different question. So I'm saying that collectively together, and NextGen is so important. I mean, and I think so strategically placed that we can make this truly the nonpartisan issue of America and building so that we can make sure that we're creating the kinds of jobs for the future of America so that tomorrow can be better for all Americans than today and yesterday is and was for us. Our challenge in the 60s against the Russians was the Sputnik satellite. We saw it goes up, and we said we can put a man to the moon. Our challenge today is creating an air system that will lead us to tomorrow.
This is not just what makes us the #1 tourism destination in the country now, having surpassed Disney World for that answer. It's not just about tourism industry. It is about the fact that we are the international financial capital, media capital, retail and shopping capital, fashion capital. That's only because people can come to New York from all over the world and access New York and New Yorkers and vice versa. We are the port of entry. We're the gateway of America to the global markets, and all of that begins and ends historically at our seaports, today at our airports. 50 to 70% of the business of our international headquarters companies in all these major sectors takes place overseas, outside the New York regional area. We are an export economy, and that is part of what, it's essentially what makes us strong. 15% of our job growth over the last 10 years has come from foreign directed investment, foreign companies having operations in the New York City and metro region. That is what is generating a huge amount of our economy. And again, the connectivity that is provided by our international airports is critical. So when we think about the future of the airports, we think about the role in our economy, it is enormous. It is the most important piece of our infrastructure in terms of maintaining our status as an international headquarters city and growing that status. And given that, we don't pay nearly enough attention to it. If you look at from the standpoint, the two issues that have been raised, Chris talked about the need for investment in the physical expansion and upgrading of the airports, and number two, both Ian and Congressman Meeks talked about the congestion problem. It's almost embarrassing when people come into New York and say, you know, the airport in Mexico City is better than the airport in New York, and ask us why that is. In Shanghai, they've just opened a new $2.2 billion terminal and are going to be able to accommodate 40 million travelers a year. Dubai, I think they made this plan before their recent problems, but ever optimistic, has tripled the capacity of their airports up to 60 million passengers and is building a new airport that will carry more travelers combined than O'Hare and Heathrow combined. Chicago is investing in its airports, extending runways and adding new ones. And we have to, here in New York, rise to the challenge of the physical expansion as well. Much has been done. American Airlines a few years ago invested a huge amount with the Port Authority in expanding Terminal 8. JetBlue, as you know, went through the agonies of historic preservation dealing with Saarinen Terminal and has invested significantly in Terminal 5 at Kennedy. Delta is prepared, if the bureaucrats get out of the way, to join in expanding and upgrading their facilities at LaGuardia. All these are important investments that the airlines are making. The partnership about 2 years ago did a study with HDR, the international engineering firm, on what congestion, traffic congestion, costs us. And when we did that study, we were able to determine the cost of congestion was some $2.6 billion in 2008 and was going to run to almost $80 billion over the next 20 years. And so NextGen becomes a system that pays for itself. Chris described our role in air traffic congestion across the country, how the spillover effect, the multiplier effect of congestion in New York contributes to the entire country's problem. The cost of congestion is not just the airlines, sitting on the tarmac, engines running, passenger delays. It's not just that cost. The cost is, it's not just to passengers. It is also to freight shippers, and it is also to our economy as a whole, as the whole economy of New York slows down when the airports are backlogged, slows down, people can't get in and out. As Greg said, the uncertainty, the ambiguity of whether or not your plane is going to be able to take off at LaGuardia and what time it will take off. Another challenge as we look at how we're going to finance upgrading and go forward, we've got both the challenge to the Port Authority, which is strapped fiscally. The state and city and federal government are all running heavy deficits. And the airline industry is beleaguered, the Gulf oil spill being the latest terrible news since 40% of our country's oil comes out of the Gulf, and the implications for the cost of fuel for the airline industry is devastating. So there are many challenges, and it is going to take major commitment to infrastructure by the federal government, which we hope will be forthcoming, and I think we all have to get behind Greg and the congressional delegation in pushing for that. It is going to require a real regional approach between New Jersey and New York and to some extent Connecticut to push for the support that we need from Washington. I didn't mention before the investment that Continental Airlines has made in Newark, which is equally important as our 6th borough airport. And the combination of the investments of the airlines, the investments of the federal government, and then we have to think about how we can generate the kind of partnerships that have been more effective in Europe in financing their airport improvements, public-private partnerships with long-term bond financing that have invested in what is required to bring our airports forward. So we at the partnership are absolutely committed to be part of the effort to make NextGen happen, to be part of the effort to generate support for financing the improvement and expansion of our airports. We think that this is the single most important investment we as a region can make in the future growth of our position in the international global marketplace.
Each day, we put about 4,500 to 5,000 flights into the air in and around our airports. This is a map of just 24 hours worth of flights from our airport system. It doesn't take into account other airports in the region that are not in our system, such as Farmingdale, Islip, Westchester, Morristown, Caldwell, Philadelphia, Albany. All those airplanes pass through this airspace. It is arguably the most congested, densely populated airspace in the world. And that's what makes this such a big challenge in our region. It's easy to say, you know, we need to do more, we need to build more infrastructure, but how do you untangle this spaghetti jungle and make it viable and allow it to move more airplanes through the system? We've heard a lot of talk about NextGen this morning, and certainly we agree that NextGen is the wave of the future. It will certainly help improve this structure and improve this system. But as we move more forward technologically, there's a lot that can be done to improve the throughput. And once we can improve throughput in the airspace, we can move more airplanes through our airport system. So what is the Port Authority doing about moving forward and moving into the future. We're doing everything and anything we can think of. We have new pavement, policy, purchase, and innovation. You've heard about the Bay Runway several times. I'm not going to dwell on it, but certainly it's one of the most challenging projects we've ever done. We started about 4 years ago, and we probably added about a year to the schedule of the project because of all the coordination that we wanted to do and the collaboration to make this thing come together in a way we felt would be beneficial to the region. We had a lot of ideas when we started, but we took those ideas. We had a couple of peer review sessions. We had regularly scheduled meetings with the FAA and with all the airlines involved. And we met probably, I want to say, almost once a week for a whole year on different pieces of this project to pull it together to make sure that we had all of our bases covered. There's a lot of things that had to be done to ensure that this project would move ahead and move ahead successfully, not just in the construction phase, although that was probably one of the most challenging, but also in how do we move airplanes through the system with our longest runway closed. I mean, the runway is 14,572 feet. It's one of the most used runways in our system. And it's certainly the runway that's used by the most critical aircraft, the ones that are going the longest distances. So we had lots of discussions, lots of heated debate. How can we use the other 3 runways more effectively? Kennedy had, in the past, had been kind of a 2 to 3 runway system, and most of the time they run parallels, northwest southeast or parallels northeast southwest, and that's the way we've done business over there for many years. But we got a lot of good people together and people with great attitudes, and they developed scenarios and strategies on how we could use the other runways more effectively. We did a lot of training and simulation. I mean, that was a key element to this. The FAA people, and I want to recognize them as well, they did a lot of work to develop these different runway scenarios. Kennedy had never used crossing runways before, ever, in my lifetime. And they actually developed ways to use their runways that cross out there effectively with the other runway closed. And they also did a lot of simulation work. All of their controllers went through simulation training, both in the TRACON and in the tower. And that we found, again, lessons learned, helped us tremendously because from day one they were able to hit the ground running and go in there and run the airplanes through this little bit of a different scenario at full speed, full complement. And I wanted to show a picture of what, we've talked about the Bay Runway and the work that's been done out there. It's a lot of concrete. And between the runway, which is 200 feet wide now, and the shoulders, you could almost play football on it sideways. It is that wide. And then you take it for about 3.5 miles, down to the other end there. It's a long walk, let me tell you that. But again, a lot of work, a lot of great effort by a lot of people. And the thing that we're most proud of, a lot of people when we started the project said, you guys are going to screw up the system. As Chris Ward said this morning, you get delayed in Chicago, they blame it on the Bay Runway project. But the fact of the matter is, we've had very few delays. We've actually had less delays this year based on the FAA OpsNet system than we did last year, same time frame. So, and almost by 50% less delays than we did last year. So it's just an amazing effort that people put forward out there. To go along with the Bay Runway, though, as Chris pointed out, there's a lot of improvements that we're doing out there. There's taxiway improvements both on the north and south side. We have, on either side of the Bay Runway, we have access taxiways that allow the controllers to sequence aircraft more effectively at the ends of the runway. And you have to think, put your hat on here. This runway, as Chris Ward said this morning, we're not going to touch this runway, hopefully, for 40 years. That's the length of time we think that this concrete's going to give us a life cycle of. So we had to think 40 years from now, where are we going to be? What do we need to put into this that we don't have to touch it for 40 more years? Where do we see the air traffic system going? So some of the things we did is we said we want to be able to sequence airplanes more effectively on the ends because we think in the end that there's going to be more automation and allow the controllers to juggle airplanes at the last minute to make the system work more efficiently. Also, we added some high-speed turnoffs on that runway, which there hadn't been just a few on there. We've added 3 high-speed turnoffs to get airplanes on and off the runway quicker because in the future, what we're hoping for with NextGen is that airplanes will be closer together. We think that through technology, they're going to be able to do that. So if they're closer together, how do we get them off the runway fast enough that we can land the next airplane or depart the next airplane before the next arrival shows up? So those are things that we wanted to put into this runway to make the airport more effective. And through this combination of different taxiway projects, infrastructure, we think that we're going to actually, improve the throughput of the runway, which then does a lot of things for us. It reduces fuel burn, but more importantly, it reduces delays to the passengers. Let's move to LaGuardia right now. You've heard talk about the new LaGuardia Airport. Well, one of the things we're looking at is a new terminal at LaGuardia. Today, if anybody's flown out of LaGuardia, you know that there's a lot of small, narrow alleyways, so that when you push the airplane off, if there's another airplane coming in, you have to sit there and wait, usually with the engines turning. Again, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for the passenger. It delays things and it complicates the mission of the airport, which is to move people through it more effectively and more efficiently. Some of the things we're looking at, and I think Karen is going to talk about it more later, is how we can move airplanes through the terminal more efficiently, get them in, get them out, and again, improve the experience for our customers. To go along with the terminal, though, we're looking at some airside development. The taxiways at LaGuardia have been there for lots of years, and certainly we want to do things that are going to improve that and move airplanes, on the ground faster. Again, not to belabor the point, but Newark, we're looking at similar things at Newark, a new Terminal A. Again, we're talking long-term, 2018, 2025, down the road. But how do we get airplanes in and out? You can see that some of the conceptual designs here, there's no constraints on pushing airplanes in and out of that terminal so they can move through much more quickly. More connectors at the end of the runways to get airplanes on and off faster, to get them around. We're looking at possible end-around taxiways to improve things long-term. And a lot of high-speed turnoffs to get airplanes off the runway so we can close up that spacing on final. GBAS, real quick, I want to touch upon GBAS. This is a great collaborative project between the Port Authority, Honeywell, Continental Airlines, Boeing. It's a wonderful team effort. GBAS, for those of you who don't know, is ground-based augmentation system. It takes satellite signals and makes them more precise that an aircraft can navigate more precisely to get us a Cat 2 approach, hopefully someday into Newark with the satellite signals. That's what a GBAS antenna looks like. We're hoping for that system to come online hopefully around the end of the year here. We're having a little bit of difficulty with it with some signal interference that we're working on right now with some of our engineers. But it's the first test of this system in an urban environment, so that's to be expected. But again, time frame is the end of the year to put this thing out there and start testing it with live aircraft. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Stewart. Stewart is a bargain. We picked up Stewart, and Bill Dakota, who was our late director, had a vision of purchasing an airport up at Stewart and bringing it into our system. And again, it was bought, for the future, with the future in mind. I mean, certainly as our airports grow, we need to figure out a way to, to move passengers that would normally drive down to our airports that live up in the Hudson Valley and give them an airport that they could utilize to take some of the traffic congestion away from the other airports. And for about $70 million, we were able to purchase Stewart in comparison to the $340 million that we're spending to redo the Bay Runway. So we got 2 runways, a terminal, and lots of developable land for about $70 million, where it cost $340 to rehabilitate 1 runway at Kennedy. Satellite navigation, I'm not going to belabor the point. We've talked about NextGen, but one of the biggest benefits of NextGen, other than the ComNav and surveillance aspects that go with it, is data sharing. We have to be able to share the data that comes from the system with all of the stakeholders on a real-time basis, and that, to me, is more of a challenge. Certainly there's things that we're going to be able to do to improve the navigation, but we have to take the data of where these airplanes are and what their intent is. When is that airplane going to be ready? That's a key element of what we're trying to do with ground congestion. One of the things that we're not proud of is that we lead the nation in delays. For probably the last 20 years, I think we've had the most delayed airports. We're in the top, I don't think we've been out of the top 5 for the last 20 years. And most of the time, we 1, 2, and 3. So, we need to take all this collective wisdom and somehow channel it and develop a system that's going to get us out of this. And, how do we reduce taxi delays? As long as I live, I'm never going to forget this. I got an email from one of our customers one day and said, we understand weather, we understand delays, but we don't understand why you put me in an airplane that is going to be number 65 for takeoff and push me out and let me sit in that airplane. And, you know where the airplane is, when it's going to get to the end of the runway. Let me sit in the terminal, use my laptop, have a cup of coffee, put me on the airplane when I'm number 12, put me out there and let me take off. And you know what? that makes perfect sense. And with the technology that's out there and that we're developing, I think we're going to be able to not only do that, you know, on a regular basis, but I want to get it to the point where you as a customer, you know, you get a little email from your carrier that says, okay, your 6 o'clock flight today, show up at 6:30 because we're going to be a little bit late because of weather or whatever. You get to the airport, you get on the airplane, it taxis out, you're number 3 for takeoff, and you go without a delay because now your time is more valuable to you. We want to be the best. We want to be number 1. And we need everybody's support, as Congressman Meek said, to tell our local elected officials, listen, we deserve to be number 1. This is the economic center of the world here. We deserve nothing but the best. And with your help and support, I think we can get there.
Among the problems are that we have 4 airports that are within 12 miles of each other. And as you saw by the diagram that Tom Bach showed, it's very difficult to be able to thread all the movement of those 3,000 to 4,000 aircraft a day through the air transportation system. And that's going to be a key part of any solution, is being able to deal with that. We're also constrained on the ground. Just the comparison of our 3 airports compared to what may be the biggest airport in the world, certainly the biggest in the United States in terms of acreage. And it limits the things that we can do in expanding the physical footprint of our 3 airports. And each one of them has their own sorts of limitations. We have crossing runways, as we do at Kennedy Airport. You saw Tom discussing the fact that for the first time there's a significant use of crossing runways because of the Bay Runway reconstruction. But it does constrain things. We also have runways that not only cross each other, but despite the fact that they're parallel to each other, may be too close to be able to operate simultaneously, as we do at Newark Airport. And certainly at LaGuardia, where we're constrained by the crossing of only the two runways that we have at that location. And meanwhile, we've been growing. We've been growing relentlessly, if not regularly. The growth has been a subject, the change in the growth, the rates have been subject to the growth in the economy. We've had 9 recessions since the Second World War. And at each recession, we've had a relative drop in the growth of air travel. And each time the recession ends, the growth has resumed. In addition to that, there have been other factors, such as the introduction of jets, the introduction of runways at LaGuardia, longer runways at LaGuardia, and shorter takeoff lengths for jet aircraft that made LaGuardia more usable. The reduction of low-fare airlines, such as People's Express back in the 1980s. Some of you may remember being able to fly to Pittsburgh for $19. And that, of course, is well in the past, but deregulation did keep the competition up and the fares down, and did result in more air travel. And, of course, we had the impact of the terrorist attack and what occurred after that, but we've rebounded and we're likely to rebound again. But forecasting air traffic is a very tricky business. The trends that we've had in the past may not hold. The question is if the kinds of expansion that some may predict continue unabated, that we may get to a point where most of us are in the air most of the day. I don't think that's going to happen, so we've got to be thinking about what are the realistic trends. But we've taken a look at different ways of looking at that, and we know that it's tied to the economy, and therefore forecasting air travel is very much tied to forecasting the economy, which is a very difficult business. What we've done to try to deal with that, and in fact the way the Port Authority has traditionally looked at the growth in air travel, is to try to estimate a range of growth over the next 10 or 20 years. And we've done that shown here, and particularly on the left, which is a blow-up of what's on the right, is we have three forecasts, low, medium, high, very clever use of the the phrases, the three forecast names. I'm trying to make a joke. Forget it. The high forecast of 1.9% would suggest that we would get to 150 million passengers by 2030. However, the low forecast suggests that we may not get to that 150 million level to well beyond 2042. So the question is, what do you do? Do you predict, do you estimate a particular year for a particular level of travel? Well, we've decided that that would not be the prudent thing to do, that rather that what we've done is we've taken three different levels of growth at 115, 130, and 150 million air passengers a year. By the way, we're now at about 102 million. We were up to 109 million in 2007 before the recession. So we've got a ways to rebound back to the 109 million level before we get even to the 115. And then what we've said is that there's going to be a range of years at which we're going to reach those levels as best as we can estimate. So the question of how quickly we deal with the growth that's going to occur will be a function of how quickly we grow. If the growth tends to be towards the higher end, then with the things that I'm going to talk about that we have to accelerate and do a little earlier. If the trends as we monitor them occur a little bit more slowly, then we're going to have a little bit more time to deal with them. But we're ultimately going to have to deal with the growth that will come. So what are we going to do? Well, there's a whole bunch of things that we could do, shown by these rectangles. We can upgrade NextGen, and there's been discussion, upgrade to NextGen, I should say, and there's been a lot of discussion about that this morning. We could redesign airspace, which was more about reducing delays than increasing capacity, and I'm not going to discuss it too much today. We can deal with, we can provide more intercity rail travel, and that's a favorite option of many, including myself. And we can use outlying airports like Stewart Airport or Islip or any one of a number of others in the region. We can say that certain aircraft, which supposedly are of less value, we will not allow to take off and land during peak hours. Flights that are going to places that are not too far away, perhaps, or on planes that are not holding too many people, perhaps. We can impose congestion pricing. We can say it'll be more expensive to travel during peak times than off-peak times, and that hopefully will get people to shift to those troughs in the diurnal pattern. We can expand the major airports, our three major airports, to give them more capacity. And we can improve ground access, which has a number of different features that play into this very complex issue.
Aviation has been a passion of mine my entire life. I was privileged to enjoy a career in the Air Force, logging well over 1,000 hours, and my feet have been on every continent in the world. And to live so close now to so many airports and able to share my passion with the CUNY Aviation Institute at York College students, it's a thrill of a lifetime. We've learned a lot about NextGen today. At the Aviation Institute, NextGen refers to the next generation that we're educating for careers in our challenging industry. Working in New York under the most complex airspace in the world requires talent and expertise unique from that of any other business. We view our academic programs as a service not just to our students, but to the aviation world.